Moving on to item 3.1. This is a public hearing. I know this is an ordinance, but this is also a public hearing.
It is, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, I declare the public hearing open. Mr. Brown?
Council, very briefly, in December, you asked staff to return staff to return with an ordinance that would not allow the sale of medical marijuana at dispensaries. You have two ordinances before you. One would do that, and the other also affects our business licensing process. Without further ado, though, I'd like the city attorney to get into some quick summary of what's before you.
Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council, as you mentioned, it is a public hearing tonight before the council related to the ordinances. By way of background, the City Council approved an interim urgency zoning ordinance to prohibit establishment of medical marijuana facilities in the city as of July 2009. Pursuant to law, council twice extended that moratorium, and that moratorium is set to expire this summer. So pursuant to state law, the City Council is required to issue a report at least 10 days prior to the expiration, stating the measures taken to alleviate the condition. And through council action tonight, this report will serve as the report that's required under state law. During the moratorium, the council has considered the issue several times, and as the city manager mentioned, the most recent direction was at the December 15th, 2010 council meeting. At that time, council directed staff to draft an ordinance prohibiting medical marijuana dispensaries, and because the city of Imperial Beach is subject to the California Coastal Commission, and Title 19, which is our zoning ordinance, is our implementing ordinance for our certified local coastal program, we were required to submit the ordinance for public review period. That public review period was held, and no comments as they relate to the general plan or the city's local coastal program were received. Public notice of tonight's hearing was done pursuant to state and local law. During the moratorium period, state and federal law related to the regulation of dispensaries has continued to evolve. To date, there is no case on point that prohibits a city from banning dispensaries. Court cases during that time have upheld a city's right to regulate dispensaries through the city's police powers. Therefore, cities throughout the state have taken various approaches. They've done outright bans, they've done implied bans through their zoning codes, and they've adopted regulations to allow dispensaries under certain security conditions. All three approaches that cities have taken find legal support in the current state of the law. So what we have found is that recently state law was amended to specifically prohibit dispensaries from being located within 600 feet of a K through 12 school. Additionally, there are several bills pending at the state level that regulate the operation or establishment of dispensaries. Senate Bill 847 is currently pending, and it would prohibit dispensaries from being located within 600 feet of a residential use, unless the local agency specifically provided otherwise. Federal law, as evidenced through attachments 16 and 17 to the staff report, reflect that marijuana is still an illegal drug under the Federal Controlled Substances Act, and that states or individuals who operate under state law could still be subject to prosecution under federal law. We've looked at other local jurisdictions. We know that the County of San Diego last summer adopted an ordinance to allow and regulate dispensaries. They put them in industrial zones with 1,000-foot buffer requirements from certain sensitive uses. And we have information that the first fully permitted dispensary will open under the county's regulations in East County. The City of San Diego recently adopted an ordinance to allow dispensaries, but we also understand that a referendum effort had began and that signatures were submitted. I haven't heard word that the referendum has been certified for an election. Last week, the City of Santee did consider the issue of their moratorium expiring, and they decided to just go ahead and let their moratorium expire and rely on their existing zoning code. So the two proposed ordinances that are before the council tonight will prohibit the distribution of marijuana to two or more persons within the city. This ordinance would allow a qualified patient to use marijuana, allows for a primary caregiver to cultivate or supply marijuana to his or her qualified patient, which is the core principle of the Compassionate Use Act. By way of this ordinance, the city is not judging the pros and cons of medicinal marijuana use. Rather, this ordinance is based upon two primary concerns: the secondary effects on neighborhoods and the lack of appropriate zones in the city based on the size of the city. Staff did prepare a map of the city to give council an idea of how using buffers adopted by the City of San Diego and by the County of San Diego, how that would look when you impose it on IB. Mr. Wade is here and he can answer questions if necessary related to attachment 13. The sheriff did submit information related to the secondary effects. The information is found in our December 15th, 2010 staff report, and further information in today's staff report. And they're also here, there's members of the Sheriff's Department here, if the council has questions they would like to ask of the Sheriff's Department. If council has questions about the ordinances as they're written or other options, I can also answer those questions. Thank you.
Do I have any initial questions for staff from my colleagues? I do have obviously lots of speaker slips here. Start with your question, Ms. Bragg.
Thank you. Mr. Wade, do you have a slide that has the sample dispensary buffer map that you can display? Thank you.
Councilmember Bragg, yes, it is on the screen right now. Get this. Essentially, I know it's difficult for people to read the legend, but what we've done here, and it's also maybe difficult to figure out exactly what's going on. The pink circles, and that's what these are, represents a 600-foot buffer from sensitive uses that have been regulated in other jurisdictions, namely schools, churches, parks. So these pink circles represent radius from existing sensitive uses that include schools, churches, and parks in the city of Imperial Beach. The green circles represent a 500-foot buffer from residential zones in the city, or residential uses. Understanding that the city of Imperial Beach has no industrial zone, so we couldn't apply the county's ordinance or regulations to the city of Imperial Beach. And there are some commercial zones, outlying commercial zones in the city of San Diego's regulations. What we did was attempt to show the one zone, that this is the C1 zone in the middle here, the general commercial zone, both the crosshatch and the blue, show how those distance requirements might impact the C1 zone. And as you can see, if you applied the distance regulations that other communities who regulate medical marijuana dispensaries enjoy or have adopted, there's virtually no area in the C1 zone within which a dispensary could locate under those locational criteria. And as the city attorney mentioned, there is state law pending that would mandate that a 600-foot distance be required from residential zones. What we've shown here is a 500-foot, so that may become state law. We don't know. If you took away that, and I'm just going through some of the things that staff has considered, if you eliminated the residential zone limitation requirement, you'd have essentially a small area in the city where you can see this green area here, because that's not an area where the pink residential zone buffer would project. So too, it would not project in this area up here, this area here, and this very eastern edge of the city. So there are very limited areas within which, if you eliminated the residential buffer requirement and still held or adopted a distance requirement of 600 feet from schools, churches, parks, you'd still be very restricted. So what this attempts to illustrate is, as the city attorney pointed out, that given the small size of our city, the small size of our commercial zones, it would be difficult, if not impossible, to adopt similar regulations that regulate the location of medical marijuana dispensaries within Imperial Beach and have any area that the zoning would allow it. So that's what this shows.
Any other questions before I go to the public speaker slips? Not seeing any. I'm going to start off with, because I have several speaker slips, and I'm going to start off with those speaker slips that are residents of Imperial Beach, California. I'll start with Mr. Ron Moody. And I'm sorry, in a normal public speaker, we go for 3 minutes. Due to the number of slips, we're going to limit it to this evening on this item to 2 minutes. And then there's a couple here that have donated time, so that would add up. 2 minutes, sir, yes.
Mr. Mayor, Council, my name is Ron Moody. I live at 709 Elder Avenue. I'll just read a brief statement that I have here. The law to provide access to medical marijuana is a classic case of good legislation gone bad. The abuse of this law by operators seeking to profit from the operation of dispensaries, which is contrary to the law, is the reason that we're having the district attorney shut down dispensaries countywide. 9 of them were shut down last year. The doctors who write the prescriptions for marijuana, advertising names such as CannaMed, MedDoc, their only interest is in trying to profit from individuals whose only goal is to get high. Look at the websites, the product that they sell, the jargon that they use is jargon for the marijuana counterculture. It's not an accepted medical practice. Those individuals that have a genuine need for the benefits of pot, there's still access available to that. But the remainder, the way these dispensaries are operated, organizing parties for the people that participate in those dispensaries, the whole thing is a sham. And the individuals that come here that want to have the dispensaries, their only interest is in getting high. So I just thank the council for using good judgment, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you. I have a Michael Dennison. All right. And just, Marcus, just for your knowledge, I mean, I limit it to 2 people donating, so you can't keep just going forever, all right? Just to let you know on that. Okay. Paul Romero.
I didn't really have anything prepared. I just came to kind of check out what's going on, but I'm not sure I fully understand the reasoning behind trying to limit medical marijuana facilities in Imperial Beach. I certainly haven't heard anything tonight. The only thing I've heard is some other San Diego and some other areas have zoning qualifications that if we tried to comply with them, we wouldn't be able to do it here. I don't know if that's a reason to limit medical marijuana facilities here in Imperial Beach. I see bars everywhere. I mean, my God, we have a porn shop right there on Palm. What's the difference? Why would you single out medical marijuana dispensaries for some kind of different treatment than bars and porn shops? I think that there's no evidence that it will detract from a neighborhood. There's no evidence that will increase crime. As a matter of fact, if you're asking people, you're limiting the areas that they can get their legally prescribed marijuana, and they can't get out to get them, then you're asking to increase crime because it's going to be, people are going to turn to illicit sources for that. So I just think that policies to limit that are, with all due respect, a little behind the times and a little short-sighted, and I think the city can use the tax revenue base for medical marijuana facilities, and there's really no drawback that I see or that I've heard tonight to allowing their establishment.
I have a slip here from Russell Ricker. Are you here, sir?
I was ceding my time.
I'm seeing that because they were put together.
I am a resident.
Yeah, I've got this information here. So Tracy Rivera, you have donated time, so you have 4 minutes. I mean, I'm not really in that position here on that kind of situation. This is set for, you know, it's not an organized presentation, it's public comments.
Mayor and council members and Gary and city attorney, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. I think most of you, with the exception of Mr. Bill Bray, remember me from the last time when I spoke in front of you with all the television cameras here and shared my personal story. At that meeting in July, you stated that you guys were going to look at what it would cost for an ordinance, what kind of ordinance, the timeline and the cost to put an ordinance in place. And then you came forward with proposing a ban. I shared my personal story in front of the cameras, and it's very scary, very, very scary to get up here and tell you that I'm a medical marijuana user. And the reason why it is so scary is because of the discrimination that as a whole, marijuana has. And as a whole, that has come down and come down from cities like ours, that it is bad, that will ruin people's lives. When quite the contrary. I want to share with you some of the things that I've done since that last meeting. After the meeting, I got an outcry of support from my colleagues, from people in the community, from friends. I had nobody that came to me and said, I can't believe you stood up and said anything. It came with respect. When you proposed a ban, I needed to understand why. Why something that has been such a benefit and so good in my life can be such harmful. I'm a mother of teenage children. I needed to understand why something could be so why you felt something could be so harmful. So I did a lot of homework and research and talked to a lot of people. I spoke to several law enforcement agencies, none of the officers of which have a personal problem with it. I spoke to several politicians, including District Attorney Bonnie DeMantis, none of which have a personal problem with personal use of medical marijuana. I went to the Sheriff's Department of their dangers of medical marijuana and their presentation at the Kiwanis meeting. The arguments when asked are weak at best, like Mr. Romero said here. What we hear, the arguments you come to us are just not good enough. One of the things you said was it can grow rooms can damage people's homes. Yet Bonnie DeMantis told me to grow it in my home. I kill my houseplants. How am I going to cultivate marijuana to a medical level? That's not something I want to do. You've said I can go to other places. Well, the city's trying to close those places down as well. One of the things that you've talked about was pesticides and chemicals, and how are you going to manage that? You don't have to manage that. Patients will manage that. You ever been to a farmer's market? Do you pick bad fruit? No. When I go to a medical dispensary, it's much like going to a wine tasting. You walk up and you get on the wall you display of all the different strains and all the different amounts and costs and what the marijuana is there. You have a display for you to look at, smell the aroma of the marijuana, and look at the crystals on the marijuana. And you could choose which brands, not brands, but strains that you would want to use for your medical reasons, much like you would in a winery. It is a professional establishment. Every one that I've been in is a very professional establishment. I can't go. My driver's license expired. I couldn't go in without a valid driver's license. I was turned away. Yet I was able to fly as a passenger on a plane. Yet I was able to rent a vehicle with a expired driver's license. Shouldn't have, but they allowed me to, because I had renewed it but didn't have it with me. But I was not allowed in any dispensaries. I think that, let me back up a second. On the presentation from the Sheriff's Department, one of the things that just really infuriated me was when they showed pictures of people going to the dispensaries, that they took photos of these people and said, does this look like somebody who needs medical marijuana? How do you know what their medical conditions?
Ma'am,
Yes.
your time is up.
4 minutes?
Yes, it was 4 minutes.
Okay.
Sir, have you already got a speaker slip in? I will allow that.
Thank you. I will end real quickly then. I've been to Capitol Hill. I've been with the lobbyists. I know what you are faced with. I know that even though you personally believe that medical marijuana is not a bad thing, that you are told to vote against it. I understand that. I understand that you have to make choices. I've seen what lobbyists do. I'm telling you, please follow the money. Do not side with the pharmaceutical companies. How many people do you know that lives have been ruined from pharmaceutical drugs, from alcohol? How many people have died? There's been a lot. How many people have died from medical marijuana or marijuana? Not one documented, recorded case. That stands to say a lot. I beg of you to take a moment and do what you believe is right. Do what you believe is right for the people, for the community of Imperial Beach. That we need to, sorry, the money is what it stems down to. I believe the attorney pointed out to the value of what dispensaries are making money. God, I'm so sorry. The whole 2-minute thing threw me off. Thank you. I'm just gonna sit down.
Thank you. Ed Sorrells?
Mayor, council, I didn't come prepared to speak tonight, but I've heard a couple of things that just don't sit well with me. I think we should have at least one dispensary here in town where I don't have to go into San Diego to buy marijuana. I use it medically. I have for several years. It works for me, and I think it should be available here in our city. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you. John Simon?
Hello, Mayor and City Council members. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you tonight. I'll be brief. I'll try to get this done in 2 minutes or less.
Sir, I need your name and address.
John Simon, Imperial Beach.
Okay.
I'm in support of staff's recommendation to prohibit marijuana dispensaries in IB. As stated in the staff report, over 200 cities and 14 counties in California have chosen to prohibit marijuana dispensaries with great support from their constituents. Stated differently, 85% of the cities in California prohibit marijuana dispensaries, and currently 100% of the cities in San Diego County prohibit them. Marijuana dispensaries are not legal at the state and federal level. Proposition 215 SB 420 don't mention marijuana dispensary storefronts in the Attorney General guidelines on the issue states. Although marijuana dispensaries have been operating in California for years, dispensaries as such are not recognized underneath the law. Proposition 215 and SB 420 allow for caregivers and patients to gather collectively to operate in a closed circuit network, but not for profit as commercial enterprises. For-profit marijuana dispensaries with big glossy magazine and internet ads operating next door to our grocery stores, schools, and parks is not this collective gathering contemplated in 215 or 420. Cities and counties with marijuana dispensary bans aren't saying that a true caregiver and patient can't associate together to use marijuana, for this is what Prop 215 and SB 420 set up. It's the illegal marijuana dispensaries that cities, counties, and neighborhoods don't approve of. Federal government has been crystal clear on the illegality of marijuana dispensaries. U.S. attorneys have consistently said that businesses selling marijuana for any purpose, including medical reasons, violates federal law. Thankfully, our law enforcement officials with cities, the DEA, and Department of Justice have acknowledged that marijuana dispensaries are illegal, they're being abused, and they're providing easy access to pot for more and more healthy kids. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. Tyrell Bonds?
My name is Tyrell Bonds. I'm a resident of Imperial Beach. I'm a recovering addict, okay? And I'm in a national recognized drug treatment program directly across the street from one of the dispensaries. Right now, I'm pretty strong in my recovery. However, there's a lot of addicts in that area. There are addicts that are walking out of that drug treatment program that are not strong enough. There are a lot of addicts walking out of there, and what they're seeing is they're seeing loitering, while children are waiting a block or a block and a half waiting for one of these medical marijuana patients to go in, come out, and give them some. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Pinetto has submitted a letter very similar to Mr. Bonds's, but does not wish to speak. Sharon Marlowe?
My name is Sharon Marlowe. I'm a resident of Imperial Beach. I was diagnosed with breast cancer in December of 2010. One of my anti-nausea medications was $275 for 3 pills. I'm grateful to be a medical marijuana patient and be able to have that medication, because without it, I would not have made it through my chemotherapy and the continuing treatment that I have now. So all I have to say is that I'm grateful that we have the dispensaries, and then if needed to, a person and their caregiver can grow their own medication. Thank you very much.
And Marcus Boyd, and you have time donated from Michael Dennison, so you have 4 minutes.
Thank you, city staff, Mr. Mayor, council members. As you know, I am the individual that brought this land use issue to the council. And along the way, it appears I've lost a friend. Council member Bragg hasn't returned any of my calls or emails, and we were friends before she was a council member here. I'm not sure exactly what I've done to the council to make them disregard my attempts to communicate, but for whatever it was, I apologize. I'd like to first start by saying that in July of last year, this council, when faced with cameras, had written into its minutes that the city was to return with a timeline and a cost analysis of strictly regulated dispensaries. Now, between the time of July and December, the council did not meet at least open session. It has come to the attention now of the public that the council did at that time or sometime thereafter begin to meet in closed session. We didn't see any of that on any of the minutes or any of the agenda items, and I ask for a cure and correct with regard to that. Also, but by the time we got to the December meeting, the agenda was grossly missing the requested timeline and the requested cost analysis. Because it was grossly missing, that is an indicate of a serial meeting. There was definitely an agenda item, or rather, I'm sorry, an action taken in July 7 that the city moved forward with a strict ordinance. That did not happen, and it was changed to listening to that Smear with Fear campaign presented by the Sheriff's Department. We would, as the public, we were told we were going to see a timeline and what a strict ordinance would look like, and we were going to see what a cost estimate and analysis looks like. We still to this day have not seen what that cost analysis looks like. It's not an impossibility, as you've stated, as the city attorney has stated. The County of San Diego was about to implement the opening of the first actual permitted dispensary in the County of San Diego. It's called Mother Earth, and when they open, they will be regulated by the Sheriff's Department's licensing division, the same one that put on the Smear with Fear campaign, which is an oddity, but that's the group that's going to be controlling it. Now, the ability to regulate outside of the buffer zones that are arguably, really arguably, a laundry list of ways to ban it. There's nothing in any city ordinance that has that type of sensitive use, nor is there anything in the city's documentation that shows the necessity for that type of use. As a matter of fact, you all were sent a last-minute agenda item, which was an analysis of crime and marijuana dispensaries near Imperial Beach. That is not foreign facts and findings. That is local facts and findings. It's not stuff that was gathered over a course of a couple of years in places that were unregulated, as much as they could find anything that maybe could possibly have something to do with marijuana anywhere in the state of California. It's right here in Imperial Beach. It's extremely relevant. And that analysis said that there is no direct correlation between crime and medical marijuana dispensaries in and around Imperial Beach. It is real facts and findings that I would really like you to stop, take a look at, not vote on this today, and actually step back and listen to the public. You have received, and I haven't heard it brought into the record, hundreds of letters from the public. Here are another 9 of them. I will step back now. Please reconsider your position.
I now call on Carol Green.
Hi. I live in Chula Vista, about 6 miles from here. I'm the mother of 3 teenage children, and unfortunately, since they were able to walk, I haven't been able to keep them very close at hand. And now that they can drive, they can get to Imperial Beach, they can get to San Diego very easily. The one thing that I know is that when the perception of harm goes down, the use of drugs goes up. And as we legalize and have dispensaries on our streets, places where people can just go and purchase marijuana, the teenagers think that it's all fine. And that is what my problem is with the dispensaries. Not patients getting together and using marijuana. If they do that in the privacy of their home, I personally don't have a problem with it. But my teenagers see dispensaries and they think, well, it must be okay. My oldest daughter's home from college. She's a freshman. I heard story after story last night as all of her high school friends gathered around to tell me about how they knew people that got marijuana, but it was okay because it was from the dispensaries, and they used it and all the problems that resulted from that. There are problems with marijuana. I applaud your proposal.
Tom Hetherington? I'm gotten close.
Thank you, city members here, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. I live in San Diego. However, I own an apartment building here in Imperial Beach. I'm concerned about my business here in Imperial Beach. I bought approximately 12 years ago my property here on 13th Street, and I was real impressed what the city was doing to clean up the area. Now, I ask you, and you don't need to answer this obviously, but how are marijuana medical pot shops, dispensaries, whatever you want to call them, I question that they're going to help the beautification and the improvements of Imperial Beach. And I'm real concerned about how that's going to affect the community, my apartments, my business. Here's a copy of my business license. I have a business license. I think every legitimate business should have a business license. Unfortunately, most of the shops that have opened up in the San Diego County and in the San Diego City, they don't even have business licenses. In fact, they don't do a lot of things that are expected of any legitimate business. I would like to see you guys continue to improve Imperial Beach. I would recommend that you keep the moratorium or an outright ban on the pot shops here in Imperial Beach. And if you ever have any questions, I've attended a lot of those supposed marijuana task force meetings in the city of San Diego, and it's amazing that everybody on that task force was either pro-marijuana, pot smokers, shop owners, attorneys that represented pot shops. They didn't have anybody that was basically had a opposite or a negative feeling about the use of marijuana. And so if you ever have any questions, you form any kind of committee, I'd be more than happy to recommend my town. You got my name and phone number. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Tom Hetherington.
Veg Linville? Is that?
Thank you, council members. 2 minutes isn't very long, so I'm going to have to talk fast. My family made landfall in Newcastle, Delaware, October 24th, 1684. I'm a free American. I'm also a medical marijuana patient. And I'm Jewish. And I gotta tell you, having seen yet another presentation like this from yet another municipality in San Diego, I gotta tell you something simple. Just because some people over here are hanging Jews and some people over here are putting them in the oven doesn't mean it's okay to poison Jews in Imperial Beach just because the other people are doing it. Now, aside from what you might be able to get away with under the law or not, it would be really nice if some municipality in San Diego would stop and think about what's the right thing to do. Because I haven't heard anything about that at all. I drink this medicine to breathe. I was referred to UCSD for a double lung transplant about 1.5 years ago. I declined. And I did this instead. And if there had not been a robust community of collectives in San Diego who came together to provide me with a very large quantity of concentrates, I wouldn't be standing here today. I know many other patients. I own property here in Imperial Beach. I grew up here. My parents met in World War II on Palm Avenue. I belong here too, folks. I need this medicine to survive. One of the formal council members last year told me they were sure I could get my medicine somewhere else. I guess that's kind of like being sure I could go be Jewish somewhere else. This is an issue of hate and prejudice. I feel for the recovering person, but if it was a pharmacy across the street, nobody would make them close. These are real sick people. We will not be trivialized, and your ordinance goes far beyond simply banning storefronts. It says that 3 of us can't collectively organize to grow in direct contravention of state law. Along with Eugene and Marcus, I'm with Americans for Safe Access. I'm the East County Coordinator for Americans for Safe Access. We've already given notice to the city of San Diego that if they continue with enforcement of their ordinance, that we will seek remedies in court. We have been involved in medical marijuana in all 16 of the states that have it now. We are a force to be reckoned with. We are real patients who are really sick. I haven't been 18 to 24 or even half that age in quite some time. And we won't just go away. We really are sick. I'm sorry more people didn't show up to tell you that tonight, but we really do need the medicine. I know my time is up. I thank you for your patience. You should not conclude this item tonight. It's important that you have real facts and real findings. We have presented you with scientifically based research on collectives. I strongly urge you
your
to
time's
compare it to what you have. Good evening.
Dana Stevens.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Dana Stevens. I'm here tonight for the East County Marijuana Task Force. You might ask, why does East County want to say anything here tonight for you? And what we do want to say is that we applaud your effort. I also want to say that we applaud your thinking about the public health and safety of youth and families in your community above all. And I'd also like to share with you the successes in the other cities that have prohibited marijuana with 100 marijuana dispensaries with 100% compliance in their communities. Most importantly, I want to share with you that the California Health and Safety Code 1136 2.7, which is from the Compassionate Use Act, specifically states that for-profit sales for marijuana are not authorized. In addition, California Health and Safety Code 11360 states that it is illegal to give away marijuana, and yet we see consistently the marijuana dispensaries advertising in their marijuana community magazines, giving away marijuana for free, against both, so in both cases violating existing California law. Again, I just want to applaud your effort tonight and thank you.
Lawrence Higley?
Mr. Mayor and members of the council, I'm Lorenzo Higley with Communities Against Substance Abuse. Not a problem. We're a 25-year-old not-for-profit community organization seeking to prevent substance abuse through research, education, advocacy, and service. We have offices in El Cajon and National City, and we try to serve the countywide community. The voters who voted for Prop 215 were supporting access for seriously ill patients, often terminally ill individuals. No one who voted for Prop 215, and I'm among them, contemplated retail marijuana shops in our commercial districts. It just was not part of the dialogue. The Attorney General's guidelines and state legislation prohibit profit making. They do not recognize dispensaries as a legal entity. We commend your leadership and staff's efforts. I've never seen a thicker staff report to protect IB and youth from increased access and your residents from problems associated with these illegal businesses. For all of those reasons, we support the staff recommendation. And if we may be of service to you in this effort, please contact us. You have my contact information. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. That concludes the public speaker slits I have at this time, and I'll go back to council members, questions, comments. Ms. Bragg? Or is that button left over?
Thank you. It was left over, but I don't mind going first. I was going to ask the Sheriff's Department if they had a presentation they wanted to weigh in on now, or did you want to do that? Okay, I'd like to hear it.
I'm going to have to limit that one too, though, because you know it wasn't part of the staff presentation, and I have limited public comment. So, if you would like to, I know there's several that could donate time to you here, sir, but
I don't have a presentation.
so you're here for our questions. If we have any direct questions for you, thank you very much.
Okay, then perhaps you could come to the speaker and I could ask you a couple of questions, if you wouldn't mind. In your opinion, do you see deterioration in our neighborhoods, and do you see an increase in crime in areas that have dispensaries?
Let me introduce myself to the crowd. I'm Lieutenant Marco Garmo. I'm lieutenant out here at the Imperial Beach Station. We cover Bonita and Lincoln Acres as well. It's difficult for me to comment on areas that have dispensaries that we don't provide law enforcement services for. Truly, the sheriffs, we're not here to get in a debate over medicinal usage. We're here basically just to advise the board. Whenever you bring a business, whether it's a dispensary or anything else, that's a primarily cash business that's selling a product that has both an illegal and legal use for. I would say in a logical manner that you're going to expect an increase in crime. A lot of the dispensaries in the city of San Diego have been robbed for both product and cash. And I know that there are statistics showing both that it doesn't have an impact on crime, but there's also statistics that show that there is an increase in crime, both property crime and violent crime. So it's a business that has the potential for, put it this way, it's not difficult to get a medical marijuana card. And I've heard some comparisons to pharmacies, and there is pharmaceutical fraud, but when you go in with a slip to get a prescription for your drugs, you're getting it from a medical doctor, not from a holistic healer that gives it to you based on a verbal complaint of pain. That's not to take anything away from people that are using it, that need it. I'm talking about the people that can abuse it. And there's a lot of room for abuse when you're talking about medical marijuana. So,
do you have a question for the sheriff too?
Yes. Sorry. Could you? I'm interested in this question of abuse because I think that's possibly the major problem here. And if it were only people who really had need, as per Proposition 215, as many have demonstrated here that they have need, I just don't think we would really have the issue. I think the issue from people that I've spoken with in this community and from people that I know elsewhere is that a lot of folks who don't have a medical need are able to get access through the dispensaries, and that seems to be something you alluded to as well. Do you have any anecdotal or other kinds of evidence, you or the Sheriff's Department, countywide or here in Imperial Beach, that sheds any light on the proportion of legitimate versus non-legitimate users of the medical marijuana dispensaries?
I don't think those statistics even exist, because for you to be able to get that statistic, you would actually have to medically test everyone that's going in there to see whether or not their supposed illness or injury requires marijuana, and that's where the openness for abuse is there, because you can walk into one of the medical marijuana card providers and tell them that you have, or hypothetically, back injury or back pain, and you can obtain a card. Does that person have a legitimate purpose for it? I'm not here to argue that, nor am I an expert in the medical field. Is the person that's handing them the card an expert in that either? So it's a difficult statistic to come up with, and it depends on who you ask. Now, when you have some people that have stood here and said that they've conducted surveillance and watched younger people go in there, or them providing it to other people, I have intelligence here from a local high school saying that there are juveniles being able to obtain the card, purchase the marijuana, and sell it at school. I don't have a specific case of it. This is intelligence that we've obtained from the street and from third-party hearsay. People with children that live in the community, people that work in our office that have children in the community, have come to me and told me this. And they're not giving me names, they're not giving me specific incidents where I can go out and conduct investigation. That's why I can't testify to it as fact. But like I said, anytime you're going to have a business, whether it's alcohol, whether it's a pharmacy, whether it's a medical marijuana dispensary, you're always going to have those issues. You're providing a product to a certain age group, to people with a certain medical problem. You're going to have a little bit of abuse, just like we have to enforce ABC laws with the liquor stores and bars in the city. But there are things in place. There are agencies in place. There are enforcement codes in place. There's really no gray area when you're dealing with those types of issues. Pharmacies, there's huge pharmaceutical abuse, and we all know that. Vicodin, Oxycontin, these are all drugs that are abused all the time. But to obtain a prescription for a prescription drug, you get it from a medical doctor. To my knowledge, there are no medical doctors that are giving prescriptions for marijuana, because it's...
Marcus, you cannot speak from the crowd, and you know that. You've been here before. You cannot speak from the crowd, and if you interrupt the meeting again, I'll go through the municipal codes. Please don't.
They may give recommendations, but it's still considered an illegal drug by the federal government, and the DEA mandates doctors and their prescriptions. So there's a lot of gray area there. Law enforcement's kind of stuck in between it all. Again, I'm not here to get in a debate with anyone. I'm just here to provide an advisement, and we are advising that to go with the ban. We are your law enforcement entity. Anytime you have a business that comes into your city, regardless of what it is, that has a potential for an increase in crime, we have to look at manpower and what we provide currently as deputy sheriffs to maintain the quality of life that you guys are living right now. And it's something that we have to revisit if indeed something comes into the city that may have a potential for an impact and increase in crime.
Please.
Question. Kind of related to what you just alluded to, but I'm not sure how the oversight and regulation of a facility, if there were a dispensary, if there were one here in Imperial Beach, would work. And maybe this is something staff has looked into, or council, or maybe sheriff's office. But what would be the implications of sufficient oversight of say, a single dispensary, in terms of how much human resources and other time and attention that would take, periodic inspections, I don't know what the procedures would be, but could you enlighten us on that?
I have those numbers, and it's actually pretty detailed. I think I've provided it to the city manager already via email, but I can get it out to you guys as well. And it's a cost breakdown. It's very extensive. Talks about crime prevention specialists, people from our licensing division. So it's a pretty good sized little packet on the on cost to keep, you know, for enforcement of the ordinances. So I can have that. I can provide that to you guys if you need it.
Thank you. I think if there are any other council members have questions for Lieutenant? For the Lieutenant, or just, okay. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Bilberg.
Thank you. Well, this is interesting. Now I know how my dad felt when he was trying to ban adult bookstores in the city. And like the adult bookstores, you know, with the battle back in the 80s, I believe that this is going to be a losing battle. I think a judge is going to turn right around and say that we're going to need to accommodate at least one. And I don't think I think it's the responsible thing to do is at least accommodate one dispensary in the city. They don't have to advertise. They don't have to do, you know, they don't have to advertise. It can be just a door in the side of the wall. But, you know, we're all in agreement that this is undesirable in our city, but the county didn't want it. They still zoned for it. I believe we should do the same thing, as long as, you know, it's legal under California state law. So as long as the federal government's not stepping in and saying anything about this, we need to go with the state law. And yeah, that's my opinion on that. We need to at least zone for one. It'd be the responsible thing to do. Thank you.
Mr. Spriggs again.
I think this is for City Attorney. And one of the speakers made reference to the proposed ordinance being overly broad because it would go beyond what's permitted under 215 and bar collective activity by more than 2 people. I think the statement was 3 people. Is that, did you hear that comment? And if so, do you have any response to that, whether that's accurate or not, that our ordinance might be considered too broad for that reason?
I can say that other cities that have adopted bans have used different numbers in their bans. Some of them say they prohibit dispensing between 1 or more. The 2 or more is in our ordinance. Some cities have that. Others have 3 or more, 4 or more. State law does not specifically state dispensaries of a certain number. You know, those types of things are not in state law. And so what we have is current state law and case law uphold a city's right to regulate based on its police power. So with this ordinance, the council is choosing to regulate what types of activities can occur in the city. You know, council has discretion to change that number if you feel like that number is too low. That's something that can be done. You know, that's.
So I'm going to follow up on Mr. Spriggs' question here. So we're not, in this ordinance, we're not talking strictly dispensaries. We're talking now of a gathering too?
Right. I mean, essentially, if you're going to have more than 2 people getting together to cultivate medical marijuana, that's what's being prohibited.
Is that because of the way that the 215 was written for the collective concept? Is that why we have to do it that way?
You don't have to do it that way. You can allow larger gatherings, but the larger gatherings are going to, you know, then end up in potentially more people gathering are going to be that use that the council, at least the last direction was that the council didn't desire that. So it's you know, again, I think I mentioned that there is no case directly on point related to a ban, so there is no state law or case law to
So
follow about what a
I'm
ban
sorry,
is like.
I'm sorry here, because I thought originally, maybe I missed that part when I was reading through it, because like somebody mentioned earlier, it is quite a large package here, that we went beyond the sense of saying, if that's what we were doing, saying that there was no place within Imperial Beach to accommodate a dispensary, is what we were thinking. And so furthermore, in this ordinance, we are now saying that if there were 4, 5, 6, or 7 members or citizens of Imperial Beach in somebody's private home, that they could not be there together with this? Is that what we're saying in this ordinance?
Essentially, yes. A medical marijuana distributing facility is defined as any location where 2 or more persons are cultivating or distributing medical marijuana to one another. And, you have to understand that state law doesn't say a primary caregiver can, what number of persons a primary caregiver can provide to.
Okay, because like we have presently, a moratorium on more tattoo shops. But I don't think there's anywhere in our code that says somebody can't do tattoos in their backyard.
Well, if it's an occupation, then that may be regulated under the city's code. So, they can't open up
Occupation, but,
businesses in residential neighborhoods.
I guess I'm confused because, I'm still of the quandary is that Imperial Beach is 2 square miles. The C1 zone that's on this map before us, if you draw what perhaps could be a state law of 600 feet, it takes out virtually everywhere in Imperial Beach. And that's kind of why we're here as far as the dispensary. But I did not, and I apologize to my colleagues, I did not read enough into the ordinance here to see that we are now saying what we can do outside of what we thought we were regulating a business or in the business code portion. I know I missed it. That's my problem. Can you give me the page number in that?
It's the first attachment, attachment 1 to the staff report. It's the very first ordinance.
Very first ordinance.
If I may, amidst all this page turning, I too was kind of caught by limiting the number of people who could gather. So we're saying that in somebody's home they couldn't do this?
If there were more than, if there was one caregiver and several patients, you could have more than 2, I think. But if there were 2 people, 2 caregivers or whatever, that would be not allowed. But let me emphasize what the city attorney said. You could set the number at whatever you want.
This is a definition that has been used by most jurisdictions that have created bans. I did mention that some of them say 1 or more, 2 or more, 3 or more. Those were the typical numbers we saw in there for cities that wanted a ban. But again, and if the council changes this definition, it wouldn't have to go back to a public review. The business ordinance is not subject to Coastal Commission or the 45-day public review period. So the definition could be amended by the council. It just depends on how many people and at what point does that create the associated problems that the city council was concerned about dealing with and wanting to have a ban in the first place.
This kind of reminds me of some NA and AA lingo that I've heard is if there's 2 or more, it's a meeting. So this sounds like if there's 2 or more, it's a dispensary. Is that? No, sir. No, sir.
Sorry,
You've
you
had your
can't.
time to speak. Thank you. And Marcus, maybe that's why I don't return your phone calls anymore. It's a disruptive behavior. But, Mr. Mayor, carry on, please.
Well, no, this is, like I was stating, is I look at this map and I think that, and Mr. Boyd is correct, that originally looking at what we thought we were going for in Imperial Beach had to do with, okay, let's strictly regulate this, knowing that we are the city that we are. When you start looking at things such as maps, including the gentleman that you brought to this city from out of town that said, follow the Berkeley regulation, which would zap out completely Imperial Beach, 100%. And that was the gentleman that came here to talk to us very, very much in the very beginning. But that was where I thought we were going. This other part, and I apologize at this last minute that I can't buy into this something here, and I don't quite understand how this fits, because I personally believe under what 215 and the people of California wanted was that there were benefits to medical marijuana. There's certain peoples with certain kinds of conditions. To say that they can't use medical marijuana in a home is not where I ever thought we were going, period.
They can.
This allows
They
it in
just
your
can't
home.
do it in large groups together. They can
I
still
know,
do
but
that.
that's not really where I personally thought we were going on this thing as
Sure.
far as the large groups. It's like trying to say you can't go watch a Super Bowl party if you have Coors there or something. I'm missing something there when we get into the private home. I mean, I thought we were dealing purely in the business sense of what kind of businesses were applicable to Imperial Beach. And when you draw the map of Imperial Beach, and I'm sorry to say that I still believe you can't fit it within our commercial zone. Whether Mr. Bilbray thinks we should allow one, which I really don't think under capitalism you should allow one of anything anywhere, and say you have a the dominant whatever it is. But I don't believe in that. But I can't understand this. So, well, no, the competition is what I believe our country was built on. But we're not limiting that as far as statewide. But it's. I'm having a problem with this part here, and it is my fault for not having read directly into that part there, because it wasn't her definition. I missed on it. But
If council wants to define it to a higher number, your attorney has said state a number.
Does it have to have a number?
It's trying to,
Well, you're going to have something that can be enforceable. So when, if you want something enforceable, you've got to give some types of parameters, or else how is the city? I mean, granted, none of these ordinances allow for criminal enforcement. So this would be city staff looking at a facility and going, okay, what is going on, and how do we define whether we need to go get an injunction or civil penalties or an administrative citation because what is happening is in violation of our ordinance. So we have to have something, I mean, if you're going to pass an ordinance, I think you would want it to be something that can be enforced by city staff. And so trying to put some type of number to it, or, if you want to say that large congregations of people can cultivate marijuana in residential neighborhoods and distribute it to each other as opposed to commercial neighborhoods, I mean, we can.
And took out just took out two or more. What would the problem be with enforcement? I mean,
Well, at that point, I think it would be broad enough so that you are not allowing the patient and the primary caregiver to do what Compassionate Use Act says they get to do, because that would be any facility or location, whether fixed or mobile, where marijuana is transmitted. So if the primary caregiver is at home growing medical marijuana and the qualified patient came over, they couldn't even exchange it if we took the two or more out of there.
That's the problem.
that's why you're saying we need to put a number. Okay.
Essentially, I mean, I could go back to the drawing board, but I'm telling you, I looked at, in terms of a ban, we looked at multiple other cities with bans, and their definitions were almost identical to this. With the
you could use language like commercial or whatever, but then you get into a definition of what is that, and somebody could say it's not commercial.
Right.
It's just in my house or something like that.
Well, and you know that really the AG guidelines that talk about cooperatives and collectives say it's nonprofit. So at that point, a true one operating under the law shouldn't be commercial. It should be a nonprofit situation. So, it's up to the council. We can make changes.
Jennifer, what's the highest number you've seen?
I don't think I saw anything higher than 4.
So that gives you some idea what other.
On the cities that were that we're a ban, as opposed to we're allowing them in our city and here are the regulations.
Mayor, if I could just respond to one other comment on the difference between a pornography shop and a medical marijuana dispensary. I think the reason the pornography shop deals with probably something as sacred in the Constitution as anything, which is freedom of speech, whereas the medical marijuana dispensary, at least to date, has not fallen under that category of freedom of speech.
Well, I mean, from my personal standpoint, it's still to the point that as a commercial zone, to have a storefront of whatever they want to call it today, I don't think it's applicable to Imperial Beach. I don't think we have the area. I don't think we have the zoning. I think we are a bedroom community. We definitely don't have industrial anymore. And it's a very, very fine commercial quarter that is right next door to residential, some of it high density residential. And so that's why in the concept of saying we can't accommodate having one of these facilities in town, it's no different than saying we can't fit certain other kind of things that people would like to have in Imperial Beach, but will never come here because the city is not the size, it's not laid out that way, and for various other reasons. This number thing still bothers me, and I don't know what the ideal number is, if that's what needs to be plugged in there. But as far as the rest of the concept of saying no to having a dispensary in Imperial Beach, I think it's appropriate to do it at this time. One of the reasons I think we're here, and I don't know what the sheriff says our costs are. I mean, one of the things I wish we had gotten to prior to this public hearing was a discussion of our city budget, which I'm sure virtually everybody will leave before we adopt a city budget and find out how do we survive in Imperial Beach, and to take on things that are not necessary to the general welfare of the whole city when we are going to be struggling for the next several years to maintain and provide such services as were brought up at the beginning of the meeting, such as sewer and other public things that we need to do. I don't think this is something that we should be expending our time, monies, or efforts on when we're not actually limiting it. We're just saying within the 2 square miles of Imperial Beach, a little dot in the spec in San Diego County, that I still support what the staff has brought forward, with the exception of this number here. I don't know how to get a grip on that part. So, I mean, that's where my position is on where we are on this evening. I just don't think it has nothing to do with saying, we're trying to deny access or anything. It's just Imperial Beach. The canvas that was presented to us here is different than it is everywhere else. We're surrounded by water, natural wildlife things, and we have very little amenities. We are a bedroom community, and that's where we most likely will be next year and dozens of years from now, because that's the way we were built out. And I just don't think we can accommodate everything that everybody wants. And I think this one presents too many problems for us to accommodate. And that's why I think we're here with this concept of a ban, if you want to look at it that way. So I still support that. I just don't know the number. And I don't know how to get that number in my head. So I don't know what the rest of my colleagues feel. And I'll start down the road with Mr. King.
I voted for the medical marijuana law in the state. I think compassionate use is a good idea. I think there's a lot of people that genuinely need it, and I have no problem with that. I think that unfortunately, the way that the regulations came down from the Attorney General, and how a lot of these dispensaries, as we call them now, began and how they evolved in this state was really created a lot of problems for all the people who are genuinely in need. And I appreciate the comment of the lady who said she has some teenage kids who are talking about all their friends that that were in school, and all their friends that get pot through the dispensaries, and they're all using it. This is a widespread problem, folks, and any of you that deny it aren't paying attention. I I fully appreciate the needs of all the people that have medical needs. However, it's a real fact that there's widespread abuses. I happen to know this firsthand because I have a teenage son that just got out of high school, and I know a lot of kids that have had access, which is shocking to me. I'm just like, come on, you guys aren't sick. So there's real problems. There's reasons why cities take a position where they're concerned about the influence or the impacts of this on the community. It's a very, very real problem. Not only that, there's 28,000 people in the city that we have to be responsible to. I'm going to read here for a second. Doctors' recommendations, I think the point was brought up by one of the speakers, that there's fairly easy to get. They must be, because a lot of the kids that I am aware of, who I won't reveal, got recommendations from doctors, and they really don't have problems. So, long story short, I have felt very strongly that I've been on the fence on this, because on one hand, I think that it's something that needs to be available. On the other hand, I think that it creates a very large burden on the city or any municipality. Secondly, the ongoing cost is something that our city, I think, would be hard-pressed to deal with at this time. Now, people say you could tax this and you could pay for your cost. No one really knows what that cost is, because I don't think it's been borne out. This is still a new issue, fresh in our minds. Even though the law was passed in the 90s, we're still just now dealing with it. We're at the apex of the issue right now in terms of how this is affecting the communities. Dispensaries currently are available nearby in the city. The collectives, I think the problem that we're running into here is that the dispensaries represent large collectives of people. That is the issue I think that the mayor has, and I do, in terms of the intent of how we're doing this. We didn't want to eliminate all opportunity. I know it's hard for people to get their marijuana. It's hard for people. A lot of people can't grow things. Although marijuana is a weed, it doesn't really require a lot of tending to actually grow. But I know there's specialized culture, and there's people who specialize in it now. It's really reached almost a state of high chemistry. At the same time, I think that, as the mayor said, I think that we're restricted in our area in what we can allow in accordance with the types of standards that are used by other cities, the standards that are set out even by the state. The only thing that I find that is an additional limitation that many cities have imposed is that of its proximity to residential uses. And that pretty much knocks out our city in terms of distances. And for these reasons, I believe that we should look at the numbers of what, and I think that the definition of one or more, or one or less, or two or less, defies the concept of what a collective is. Because if you got one, it's not a collective. Two could be called a collective, but that's sure a minor definition. At the same time, I feel very strongly that at this time we need to move forward with this ban.
Mr. Spriggs?
I think I agree with a lot of what Mr. King has said. I noticed, I took notes from every speaker. I noticed, that of the 13 speakers, 6 alluded to the abuse issue, and that's my number one concern about this, is not the legitimate users, the people who really do have a medical condition that can best be alleviated by medical marijuana. But, for everyone, there seems to be maybe a dozen, maybe half a dozen, I don't know, of people who are getting it on a secondary basis or getting it on a primary basis with cards. It's highly unregulated or inadequately regulated, so that the people who really need it are the ones who have access to it. When we evolve to the point in time where it's the folks who really have a medical need that are the only folks who have access to medical marijuana, then I think we could take a look at this in a different way. Imperial Beach has one of the speakers said, has been trying to clean itself up for a couple decades now, has been doing a good job. We're trying to create a family, unique beach environment here where people can enjoy this environment, where we can have tourists. We're getting a first-class hotel right on the beach. We've really got to think about, you know, the overall good of the community in terms of not just this issue, but everything that comes before us that is going to have an impact on where we want to go as a community, you know. And that means, you know, we have to look at all sorts of uses that are, whether they're consistent or inconsistent with the vision that we have as in terms of where we want to go as a community. A vision that was very well articulated during the new zoning proposals that were approved in various community meetings and by the council to move forward to further development and various other forums. So it just seems to me that the risk of going with a dispensary in light of the unregulated nature of it and the likelihood of a lot of abuse and there being more problems around it is being totally inconsistent with where we are going as a city. I think that's reason enough to not be supportive. And then there's all the other reasons. I mean, I've looked at the budget. A lot of you won't be here for the budget discussion. I hope you all stay. But we're on the fine line between red ink and black ink when it comes to the budget. We really can't afford another cost of any significance in this town at this point. And it's, you know, I just don't know that we can assume cost risks either. That are associated with this whole idea of a dispensary in Imperial Beach. And, you know, I think we can always come back and look at this question again, particularly if it turns out that there are improved ways to regulate so that only really needy people are getting it. And if it turns out that there's not ready access in 4 or 5 or 2 or 3 dispensaries that are almost in Imperial Beach because they're so close to Imperial Beach, so that people who live in Imperial Beach don't have to really go that far at all who have real need to get their medical marijuana. So looking at all those things, Mr. Mayor, I just don't, you know, I'm inclined to, you know, agree with what you've said and what Councilmember King has said, that, you know, I don't think this is the time for us to go forward with it.
Okay, Ms. Bragg.
Thank you. I had asked that Mr. Wade put that map up there so that everybody could see what we're up against as far as where would you allow it. I think the old saying, you know, a picture tells the story in 1,000 words or less. When you consider, do you want this around a school, a church, your neighborhood? I think the majority of our 28,000 residents would say no, they wouldn't. I'm a grandmother. My grandson's going to be 12 August 1st. Do I want little Christopher to be walking home from school and bypass one of these? No, I don't. Do I want one of his friends or his parents, the kids' parents, to be able to go into one of these places and buy brownies and have them laying at home? I tell you, little Christopher would not pass up a brownie. A joint, yes. I think his father has educated him enough to say no to that. And much like one of our former colleagues up here, Mr. Fred McLean, had brought a reader magazine. If you go through this magazine, it's enlightening. And like what our sheriff, our lieutenant had alluded to, you can, for $25, you can get a renewal on your card from any doctor. To me, that's scary. That's scary. That's somebody who can just, well, I had a doctor a couple years ago, you know, I had anxiety, I got a card, and so now I want you to do that. It's absolutely frightening to me. And also when I hear that, oh, you know, marijuana doesn't lead to anything stronger. You know, my brother started out smoking pot, and he became a heroin addict. So I kind of have a hard time buying that. I am inclined to go ahead with the ban for the reasons I've stated, reasons that councils before us have looked at. We have gone a long way in cleaning up this community. We have had business members come to this community, come to our sheriff's department. This was in closing down bars. If any of you have been around here a long time, when we closed down the High Tide and the Rathskeller, people came out in droves. They didn't want that there. And so we responded to that. When we had a smoke shop on Seacoast Drive, that was proposed. Again, the community came out in droves and really took us to the carpet and said, what are you doing? That's in our commercial corridor. That's not what we want. That's not who we are. That's not what we want to be when we grow up. And we've come a long way in cleaning up our community. And I voted for Proposition 215. Don't get me wrong. I believe in compassionate use. And I know a lot of you people out there need it. And there was a time in my life where I could have probably used it too. I went to my doctor, however, and got prescription medicine. After long hours of testing of all sorts of kinds, it was decided that was the best road for me to go. The only sticking point I have, Mr. Mayor, is the number, as well as you do. I don't know if that portion of the ordinance can come back to us, if we can bifurcate the two ordinances.
We'll get there. Mr. King, did you have one more thing to say?
Yes, thank you. My heart goes out to all the people that really need this. And the key point in the legislation said people with serious illness. And it's really highly unfortunate that there has been such a grain of that definition through time and through the numbers of people and the kinds of people that have taken advantage of what was a good law, which has become very muddied over the years. And I think that if the ASA and the other people that are advocates would do a little more diligent homework and work harder at trying to keep some better controls in some of the dispensaries, it might bear better fruits in the future all around the state and all across the country. I think that there's a responsibility inherent in the people that run these dispensaries, as there is in a city, to protect the cities. And that's where we're at. We're at a nexus in that issue, and it's a difficult, challenging problem to face. But I think that there's a responsibility borne greater than has been taken. And not to say that there aren't some dispensaries that are run excellently, because I've visited a few. So I'm not talking out of my hat here, but there are still a lot of problems that need to be resolved, and I hope that we can all move forward with this. That being said, I would like to see us take another look at what the definition.
Mr. King, I've just been discussing it with the city attorney and the city manager here, and it is in our business code where that is, the definition is. So to make that change, Ms. Lyon, could you explain how that works?
Sure. If the council wanted to change the business code definition and still introduce the ordinance for first reading tonight, you would just specify that change on the record, the exact change that would be made. The business code ordinance was not, because it's our business code, it wasn't required to go through the 45-day public review process, so pursuant to our local coastal program. Therefore, the council could make the change with the motion tonight and still introduce the ordinance and then have the adoption.
Because we have before us is two ordinances,
yes,
correct?
and
okay, one is a zoning ordinance and one is a business code ordinance.
Right, and the zoning ordinance does not have the definition of medical marijuana dispensary, distribution facility. It just refers to the business code section. And that was done because our business code, if council experienced any concerns or if the city wanted to amend that definition, either because of change in state law or because of operation, it could be done easily with, two readings of an ordinance as opposed to going back through our LCP process.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing, and I'd like to start with making a motion, or I guess we have an introduction of ordinance, starting with the first one, which is the business code one, which is an introduction of it, of 2011-118, with a modification, if my colleagues would agree, is to change the wording in the definition from 2 or more persons to 4 or more persons. The city attorney has indicated that she has researched here and seen that has been at least used at the 4 level in other people's codes, so that would work for us. So I'm going to ask for the introduction of ordinance 2011-1118, the business ordinance, and ask the city clerk to introduce that.
Ordinance number 2011-1118, an ordinance of the City Council for the City of Imperial Beach, California, amending Title IV, Business Licensing and Regulation of the Imperial Beach Municipal Code by adding Chapter 4.60, Medical Marijuana Distribution Facilities.
I'd like to make a motion to dispense with the first reading of ordinance 2011-1118 and set the matter for adoption at the next regularly scheduled city council meeting. That includes the revision to section 4.60.010 definitions, and section A under that to change the number of otherwise provided to 4 or more persons with identification cards. Is that terminology correct?
Absolutely.
I make that motion. I have a motion and a second. Do we have any more discussion on that item? This is the business code section.
Would be if our intention is to effectively ban medical marijuana dispensaries, and it turns out that 4 is what they shrink down to in a sort of de facto sense.
But I think what
we
the
have to-
city attorney was explaining to us, this is one that's easy for us to revise if we see it necessary, because it is in the business code, this definition.
That's really all I'm saying, is it's something
we have that
we
available.
should pay attention to.
Okay. I understand that. Any others? We have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Motion carried by the following vote. Ayes, Janney, Spriggs, Bragg, King. Noes, Bilbray.
Moving on, call for an introduction of ordinance number 2011-1119, which is the zoning ordinance along with this matter.
Ordinance number 2011-1119, an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Imperial Beach, California, adding Chapter 19.61, Medical Marijuana Distribution Facilities, to Title 19 zoning of the Imperial Beach Municipal Code and repealing Ordinance 2010-1107.
I'd like to make a motion to dispense with the first reading of ordinance number 2011-1119 and set the matter for adoption at the next regularly scheduled city council meeting. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on this item? Could we please vote?
Motion carried by the following votes. Ayes, Janney, Spriggs, Bragg, King. Noes, Bilbray.
Thank you. Moving on our agenda.